What happens when humanity's greatest weakness becomes its most terrifying strength? In a galaxy where every advanced species has evolved beyond the primitive need for emotional bonds, where logic and cold calculation rule supreme, humans remain the only race foolish enough to fight and die for love. The Galactic Council thought they understood humans. They catalogued our weapons, measured our ships, analyzed our tactics. But they missed the one thing that would reshape the balance of power across 10,000 worlds: our ability to form unbreakable emotional connections with anyone, anywhere, regardless of species, culture, or cosmic law. Captain Jake Morrison was supposed to be just another human mercenary, expendable, predictable, easily controlled. A simple extraction mission on a backwater mining colony. Get in, grab the target, get paid, get drunk. Standard Tuesday night work. He never expected to wake up wearing ceremonial robes he didn't recognize, bound by marriage laws he'd never heard of, to the most powerful woman in the galaxy, a woman who could obliterate entire star systems with a thought, but had never experienced a single moment of genuine affection until a crazy human stumbled into her life. Now the fate of human expansion into the galaxy rests not on our weapons or our ships, but on whether one stubborn ex-soldier can teach a galactic empress what it means to be loved, before her enemies use their newfound weakness to destroy them both. This is the story of how humanity's greatest fools became the galaxy's most dangerous weapon. Welcome to a universe where love conquers all, whether the galaxy likes it or not. Jake Morrison had always prided himself on being the kind of mercenary who asked only 3 questions: how much? How dangerous? And when do I get paid? The 4th question, what could possibly go wrong, was usually answered in spectacular fashion without him having to voice it. Standing in the cargo bay of the freight hauler Lucky Strike, watching the swirling blue-green marble of Kepler 442b grow larger through the viewport, Jake figured this job would be no different. Simple extraction. Get planetside, locate one Dr. Elena Vasquez, convince her to leave her research station, and escort her safely to the rendezvous point. 3 days maximum. Clean, easy, and paying enough credits to keep him in decent whiskey and ship repairs for the next 6 months. The job broker, a nervous centurion with too many eyes and not enough honesty, had been unusually generous with the advance payment. Jake should have seen that as a red flag the size of a small moon. Instead, he'd seen it as an early retirement fund. You sure about the intel? Jake asked the ship's AI, a sarcastic personality matrix that insisted on being called Sarah despite having neither gender nor the legal right to an acronym. 1 human scientist, minimal security, standard academic research facility? That's what the manifest says, Sarah replied through the overhead speakers, her synthetic voice dripping with the digital equivalent of an eye roll. Of course, the manifest also claims this is a mining operation studying geological formations, which is interesting since the energy readings I'm picking up suggest they're running a fusion reactor capable of powering a small city. Jake strapped on his gear vest, checking his sidearm and the non-lethal restraints he hopefully wouldn't need. Mining operations need power. Mining operations don't usually require quantum entanglement communication arrays or the kind of electromagnetic shielding that would make a battleship jealous. Your point being? My point being that either Dr. Elena Vasquez is the most well-funded geologist in human space, or someone isn't telling you the whole truth about this job. Jake paused in his equipment check. In his 15 years as a mercenary, he'd learned to trust his instincts, and right now his instincts were telling him the same thing Sarah was. But he'd also learned that curiosity killed more than cats, it killed mercenaries who asked too many questions about jobs that paid too well. Maybe she's studying something valuable, he said, more to convince himself than Sarah. Rare minerals, new energy sources. Corporate espionage pays better than straight extraction. Or maybe she's working on something that certain parties would very much like to keep quiet, Sarah countered. Jake, I've been analyzing the star charts for this system. Kepler 442b is less than 50 light-years from the edge of Zephyrian space. That got Jake's attention. The Zephyrian Empire controlled nearly a quarter of the known galaxy, and they weren't known for their tolerance of human expansion. If Dr. Vasquez was working on something that had caught their attention. Too late to back out now, Jake muttered, sliding his plasma rifle into the magnetic holster on his back. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? Sarah's silence spoke volumes. The drop pod's atmospheric entry was rougher than Jake preferred, the heat shields glowing cherry red as they cut through Kepler 442b's thick atmosphere. The planet was officially classified as marginally habitable, breathable air, tolerable gravity, and weather patterns that wouldn't kill you immediately. Unofficially, it was the kind of place where colonies went to die slowly and mining operations went to disappear entirely. The research facility appeared on Jake's HUD as he descended, a cluster of prefabricated buildings arranged in a defensive pattern around a central complex. From the air, it looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, a small, modest scientific outpost focused on legitimate research. The kind of place that minded its own business and bothered nobody. The kind of place that was currently surrounded by 50 Zephyrian combat mechs. Well, Jake said aloud as his pod's parachutes deployed, that's new information. The mechs were positioned in a standard siege formation, their sleek, predatory forms creating an impenetrable ring around the facility. Each one stood 12 feet tall, equipped with enough firepower to level a city block, and piloted by Zephyrian warriors who viewed combat as a form of religious expression. They weren't attacking the facility, Jake noted. They were waiting for something. Or someone. Jake's pod touched down in a grove of native trees about 2 kilometers from the facility, the impact cushioned by emergency foam that dissolved almost instantly in the planet's humid air. He activated his camouflage system and began moving through the undergrowth, using his military training to stay invisible while observing the situation. The Zephyrians had been there for a while, judging by the way they'd settled into defensive positions. Their mechs showed signs of recent combat, scorch marks, patched armor plating, and the kind of wear that came from extended field operations. Whatever they wanted from Dr. Vasquez, they were serious about getting it. Jake activated his comm system, establishing a secure link with Sarah. Change of plans, he whispered into his throat mic, the extraction just became a rescue operation. I'm reading massive energy signatures from inside the facility, Sarah reported. Whatever they're working on down there, it's active and drawing tremendous power. Any sign of Dr. Vasquez? Negative. But, Jake, I'm detecting something else. There's a ship in high orbit that wasn't there when we arrived. Configuration unknown, but it's big. Capital ship class. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the planet's evening air. Capital ships meant serious players, and serious players meant his simple extraction job had just become something entirely different. He was starting to understand why the job broker had been so generous with the advance payment. Moving closer to the facility, Jake could see the situation more clearly. The Zephyrian mechs weren't just maintaining a siege, they were protecting something. Every few minutes, one of them would adjust position slightly, maintaining perfect sight lines not just to the facility, but to the sky above. They were expecting visitors. Jake was studying the patrol patterns when his comm system crackled with an encrypted transmission on a frequency he didn't recognize. The voice that came through was female, human, and absolutely terrified. This is Dr. Elena Vasquez at Research Station Gamma 7. If anyone receives this message, do not attempt a rescue. I repeat, do not attempt rescue. The situation here is beyond human understanding. The artifact we discovered, it's not what we thought. It's not what anyone thought. Static filled the channel for a moment before her voice returned, quieter and more urgent. They're coming for it. All of them. The Zephyrians, the hegemony, species I've never heard of. They all want what we found, and they'll kill anyone who gets in their way. The artifact, it's active now. It's changing things. Changing people. I don't know how much longer I can contain it. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving Jake staring at his comm display in the growing darkness. An artifact that attracted the attention of multiple galactic powers, something that could change people, and a scientist who was more afraid of rescue than she was of siege. This was definitely not a standard extraction job. Jake was considering his options when the first explosion lit up the night sky. One of the Zephyrian mechs had opened fire on the facility's outer defenses, its plasma cannons carving glowing trenches in the earth. Within seconds, the entire siege line erupted in coordinated fire, turning the peaceful research station into a war zone. But the facility's defenses were more sophisticated than they appeared. Energy shields flickered to life around the main buildings, deflecting the initial barrage with surprising effectiveness. Return fire came from concealed weapons platforms, military-grade pulse rifles that had no business being at a geological research station. Jake found himself caught between two armies, watching a battle that made no sense according to his briefing materials. Dr. Elena Vasquez wasn't just a scientist, she was someone important enough to spark an interstellar incident. His contemplation was interrupted by movement in his peripheral vision. A figure was approaching through the trees, moving with the fluid grace of someone wearing powered armor. Jake dropped into a combat crouch, bringing his rifle to bear on the approaching shape. The figure stepped into a shaft of moonlight, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. It was humanoid but clearly not human, standing nearly 7 feet tall with an elegance that suggested both incredible physical capability and absolute confidence. The armor it wore seemed to flow like liquid mercury, adapting to the wearer's movements with impossible smoothness. But it was the face visible through the transparent helmet that made Jake's finger freeze on his trigger. She was beautiful in a way that transcended species barriers, with features that seemed familiar yet utterly alien. Her skin had a subtle luminescence, as if lit from within by some internal energy source. Her eyes were large and expressive, colored like liquid starlight, and, when they met Jake's gaze across the darkened forest, he felt something shift in the universe around him. "Human," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the distance despite the battle raging nearby. The word wasn't a question or an accusation. It was an observation, delivered with the kind of scientific curiosity usually reserved for interesting specimens. Jake kept his rifle trained on her, though some instinct told him it would be about as effective as harsh language. "That's right. And you are?" She moved closer, and Jake noticed that the sounds of battle seemed to fade around her, as if reality itself was making room for her presence. "I am Lyralii, Crown Princess of the Zephyrian Empire, heir to the Quantum Throne, and guardian of the 7 stellar matrices." Jake blinked. "That's a lot of titles." "I have many responsibilities," she replied with what might have been amusement. "Currently, the most pressing involves securing an artifact that could destabilize the balance of power across multiple galactic sectors." "Let me guess, the same artifact Dr. Vasquez is protecting in that facility." "The same artifact that has already begun affecting everyone in its vicinity," Lyralii corrected. "Including, it would seem, myself." She was close enough now that Jake could see her clearly, and what he saw made no tactical sense. This was clearly a being of immense power, her armor alone probably cost more than his entire ship, yet she was approaching an unknown human mercenary with the casual confidence of someone discussing the weather. "You should not be here," she continued, studying Jake with those impossible eyes. This operation was planned with surgical precision. Every variable was accounted for, every possible complication prepared for. Except the artifact's influence on Zephyrian physiology appears to be unexpected. The way she said it made Jake's tactical instincts scream warnings, but he found himself oddly reluctant to retreat. There was something about her presence that was simultaneously calming and electric, like standing in the eye of a cosmic storm. "What kind of unexpected?" he asked. Instead of answering, she removed her helmet, and Jake forgot how to breathe. Her hair moved like liquid light, shifting between colors that had no names in any human language. Her features were perfect in a way that transcended mere physical beauty, as if she had been crafted by artists who understood aesthetics on a quantum level. But it was her expression that caught him off guard, vulnerable and uncertain in a way that seemed impossible for someone with her bearing. "The artifact appears to amplify emotional resonance across species barriers," she said quietly. "It has been affecting my people for the past 3 days, creating sensations we do not typically experience." "What kind of sensations?" She looked directly at him, and Jake felt that universe-shifting sensation again, stronger this time. Longing. Connection. The desire for companionship that transcends strategic alliances or political necessity. Jake finally understood what he was looking at. An alien princess, probably one of the most powerful individuals in known space, was experiencing something her species had evolved beyond millions of years ago. She was learning how to feel love, and the first thing she'd encountered while in that vulnerable state was him. "That's," Jake started to say. "Problematic," Lyralii finished. "Yes, I am aware." The battle around the facility was intensifying, more Zephyrian forces arriving to join the siege while the facility's defenders fought back with increasingly sophisticated weaponry. But Jake found himself more interested in the alien princess standing in front of him, looking at him as if he might hold answers to questions she'd never known how to ask. "You should leave," she said, though her tone suggested she very much hoped he wouldn't. "The situation here will become increasingly dangerous." "Can't do that," Jake replied, surprised by his own words. "I have a job to finish. Retrieving Dr. Vasquez. Among other things." Lyralii tilted her head, studying him with renewed interest. "You are not what I expected from human mercenaries." "What were you expecting?" "Someone driven purely by financial motivation. Someone who would abandon a dangerous operation when presented with superior force." Jake found himself smiling despite the circumstances. "You've been talking to the wrong mercenaries." Something changed in her expression then, a warmth that seemed to light her from within. "Perhaps I have." The moment was interrupted by an urgent transmission on Jake's comm system. Sarah's voice crackled through with barely controlled panic. "Jake, you need to see this. I've been monitoring communications from that capital ship in orbit, and you're not going to believe what I've intercepted." "What is it?" "It's a marriage contract. Specifically, a Zephyrian royal marriage contract. And, according to the quantum legal framework they operate under, proximity to a member of their royal family while under the influence of their sacred artifacts constitutes a binding engagement ceremony." Jake looked at Lyralii, who was suddenly very interested in examining the ground near her feet. "Is that true?" "Zephyrian law is complex," she admitted. "And, yes, technically, our current situation could be interpreted as legally significant." "How legally significant?" "Well," she said quietly, "according to the most strict interpretation of our customs, we are now technically betrothed." Jake stared at her. In the distance, the battle raged on, two armies fighting over an artifact that was apparently rewriting the emotional makeup of everyone in its vicinity. Somewhere in that facility was Dr. Vasquez, the woman he'd been hired to extract. Above them, ships full of aliens were monitoring a situation that was spiraling rapidly out of anyone's control. And, now, apparently, he was engaged to marry an alien princess. "Well," Jake said finally, "this is new." Lyralii looked up at him, and, for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled. It was radiant and beautiful and absolutely terrifying in its implications. "Yes," she agreed. "It is." The night was still young, and Jake had a feeling it was about to get much more complicated. Jake Morrison had faced down pirates, survived 3 different wars, and once talked his way out of an execution by convincing a hegemony tribunal that his war crimes were actually elaborate performance art. But, standing in an alien forest, technically engaged to a galactic princess while explosions lit the sky around them, was testing even his considerable adaptability. "So," he said, trying to process the situation rationally, "when you say betrothed, are we talking about a symbolic political arrangement, or?" According to Article 47 of the Zephyrian Royal Marriage Codes, Lyralii replied with the precision of someone who had unfortunately memorized the relevant legal documents, a binding commitment that can only be dissolved by mutual consent, death, or trial by quantum combat. Quantum combat? It involves subatomic particle manipulation and usually results in both participants being scattered across several dimensions. Jake decided not to ask for clarification. "And the mutual consent option?" Lyralii's expression became carefully neutral. "Would require both parties to formally reject the bond while not under the influence of any emotion-altering substances or artifacts." They both looked toward the research facility, where the mysterious artifact was presumably continuing to broadcast whatever field was making Zephyrians experience human-like emotions. The kind of emotions that made interspecies marriage contracts seem like reasonable ideas. "That could be a problem," Jake observed. Before Lyralii could respond, the ground beneath their feet vibrated with a deep, rhythmic pulse. The energy emanating from the research facility had changed, becoming more intense and, somehow, more focused. The Zephyrian mechs surrounding the compound began moving in perfect synchronization, their formation tightening like a mechanical noose. "The artifact is entering its next phase," Lyralii said, her voice carrying a note of urgency Jake hadn't heard before. "My forces have approximately 17 minutes before it reaches critical resonance." "And then, what happens?" "According to our xenoarchaeologists, the emotional amplification effect will expand exponentially. Within hours, it could affect every sentient being in this star system. Jake tried to imagine what would happen if every member of multiple space fleets suddenly started experiencing intense emotional connections to whoever happened to be nearby. The diplomatic incidents alone would reshape galactic politics for generations. "We need to get to Dr. Vasquez," he said. "She's the only one who understands how to shut this thing down." "We?" Lyralii raised an eyebrow that somehow managed to be both alien and remarkably expressive. "You want this artifact contained as much as I do. And, like it or not, we're apparently a team now." Lyralii considered this for a moment, then activated a control on her armor. Her helmet reformed around her head, and her voice took on the crisp authority of someone accustomed to commanding armies. "Very well. But understand that I am not some helpless princess requiring rescue. I am a trained warrior and strategic commander." "I wouldn't dream of suggesting otherwise," Jake replied, checking his weapons one final time. "Any chance your people would hold their fire if they saw you approaching with a human?" "Under normal circumstances, certainly. However, the artifact's influence has made their behavior somewhat unpredictable." As if to emphasize her point, one of the Zephyrian mechs suddenly broke formation and began firing its weapons skyward, apparently attacking invisible targets. The other mechs quickly surrounded their malfunctioning comrade, their pilots presumably trying to determine whether this was enemy action or artifact-induced hallucination. "Right," Jake said. "We'll work around them." Moving through the forest toward the facility proved more challenging than Jake had anticipated, not because of enemy resistance, but because of Lyralii's complete inability to move stealthily. Her armor, while technologically impressive, apparently wasn't designed for covert operations. It glowed faintly, hummed with energy, and made soft chiming sounds whenever she moved. "Is there a stealth mode on that thing?" Jake whispered as they paused behind a fallen tree. "Zephyrians do not typically employ stealth tactics," Lyralii replied, sounding slightly offended. "We prefer direct confrontation as a matter of honor." "Well, your honor is going to get us killed if those mechs spot us. Perhaps you could teach me your human stealth techniques." Jake looked at her glowing, chiming armor and tried to imagine any scenario where she could move undetected. "It's mostly about staying low, moving slowly, and not lighting up like a disco ball." "I am unfamiliar with the term disco ball. Cultural reference." "Never mind." Jake studied the facility's perimeter defenses, looking for weaknesses. The main gate was heavily fortified and currently under direct fire from 3 mechs. The side entrances were covered by overlapping fields of fire. But there was a maintenance access tunnel that ran beneath the compound's eastern wall, probably used for utility lines and emergency evacuation. "There," he pointed. "We go underground." "I do not think my armor will fit in such confined spaces." Jake was about to suggest she remove the armor when he realized the implications of that idea. An alien princess, technically his fiancée, removing her protective equipment in the middle of a combat zone. His brain tried to process the tactical considerations while simultaneously failing to ignore the personal ones. "Alternative plan," he said quickly. "You create a distraction while I infiltrate the facility and locate Dr. Vasquez." "Absolutely not. If we are to be bonded by Zephyrian law, we must face challenges together. It is a matter of cosmic harmony." "Cosmic harmony?" "The universe requires balance in all things, including partnerships. One cannot succeed where two would fail." Jake had a suspicion that Lyralii was making up cosmic philosophy on the spot, but he found himself oddly touched by her insistence on staying together. It was probably the artifact's influence, but the part of him that had spent 15 years working alone was discovering that having a partner, even an alien princess with glowing armor, felt surprisingly right. "Fine," he said. "But we do this my way. Can you turn down the light show on that armor?" Lyralii touched several controls, and the armor's glow dimmed to barely perceptible levels. The humming stopped, though the chiming sounds persisted whenever she moved. "That's the best I can manage without compromising defensive systems. It'll have to do. Follow me, stay low, and try to move like you're stalking prey instead of leading a parade." They made their way toward the maintenance tunnel, Jake leading and Lyrelii following with the careful concentration of someone learning an entirely new skill set. Despite her initial difficulties, she proved to be a quick study, adapting her movements to minimize noise and maximizing cover. The maintenance tunnel was exactly as cramped as Jake had expected, but Lyrelii's armor proved more flexible than it appeared, adapting to the confined space with liquid smoothness. They crawled through darkness for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the sounds of battle growing muffled above them. Jake, Lyrelii said softly as they navigated a particularly tight section, "May I ask you something?" "Sure. In your experience, how do humans typically handle unwanted emotional attachments?" Jake paused in his crawling. "Are we talking about the artifact's influence, or something else? I am attempting to determine whether what I am experiencing is artificial enhancement or something more organic." That was a question Jake had been avoiding thinking about. The attraction he felt toward Lyrelii was intense and immediate, but was it real, or was it the result of alien technology rewiring his brain chemistry? "Honestly," he said, "I don't know. Human emotions are complicated even under normal circumstances. Zephyrian emotions are not complicated at all. We experience satisfaction when achieving objectives, frustration when encountering obstacles, and loyalty toward our hierarchical superiors. What I am feeling now has no precedent in our psychological framework." They reached the end of the tunnel, emerging in a utility room filled with humming machinery. Jake helped Lyrelii climb out of the access shaft, trying not to think about how her hand felt in his or how her proximity made his heart race. "What are you feeling?" he asked, immediately regretting the question. Lyrelii looked at him with those impossible starlight eyes. "I am feeling as though the universe has suddenly become much larger and much smaller at the same time. As if every moment before meeting you was merely preparation for something I did not know I was searching for." Jake's tactical brain screamed warnings about emotional compromise in combat situations, but the rest of him was having trouble caring. "That sounds like more than artifact influence. That is what concerns me." They were standing very close in the dim utility room, and Jake found himself studying her alien features as if memorizing them. The subtle luminescence of her skin, the way her hair seemed to move with its own internal currents, the expression of vulnerable confusion that somehow made her seem simultaneously more and less human. "Jake," she said quietly, "if we survive this mission, what happens to us?" It was a fair question, and one Jake wished he had a better answer for. "I don't know. I've never been engaged to an alien princess before. I have never been engaged to anyone before. Zephyrian royal marriages are typically arranged for political advantage, negotiated by representatives over months of careful diplomacy. This is definitely more spontaneous than that. Much more spontaneous. And infinitely more complicated." Jake was about to respond when alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Emergency lights bathed everything in red, and a computerized voice announced that the facility was under lockdown due to catastrophic containment breach. "That doesn't sound good," Jake muttered. Through the utility room's single window, they could see into the facility's main laboratory complex. Emergency personnel were evacuating while automated systems sealed blast doors and activated containment fields. In the center of the chaos, a pillar of swirling energy rose from floor to ceiling, pulsing with the same rhythm they had felt earlier. "The artifact," Lyrelii breathed. "It's fully active now." As they watched, the energy pillar began expanding, and Jake could see people within the facility stopping their evacuation procedures to stare at each other with expressions of wonder and confusion. The artifact wasn't just amplifying emotions anymore, it was creating new ones. "We need to find Dr. Vasquez now," Jake said, moving toward the utility room's exit. The corridor beyond was chaos. Scientists and technicians were wandering aimlessly, some crying, others laughing, all of them displaying emotional states that seemed completely disconnected from their circumstances. Jake recognized the signs of severe psychological disruption, but these people seemed happy about it. "The artifact is affecting humans as well," Lyrelii observed. "But differently than it affects my people." She was right. While the Zephyrians seemed to be gaining new emotional capabilities, the humans appeared to be experiencing a kind of emotional amplification that was overwhelming their normal psychological defenses. They made their way through the facility, following signs toward the main laboratory while avoiding the increasingly erratic behavior of the affected personnel. Jake's military training kicked in, treating this as a search and rescue operation in a hostile environment, but the hostility was of a type he'd never encountered before. Dr. Vasquez, he called out as they reached the laboratory level. My name is Jake Morrison. I'm here to get you out. A door opened at the far end of the corridor, and a woman emerged wearing a radiation suit and carrying a tablet covered in complex readouts. She was tall, dark-haired, and moved with the controlled urgency of someone who had been dealing with a crisis for too long. You're the extraction team? Dr. Vasquez asked, looking from Jake to Lyralii with barely concealed surprise. Part of it, Jake replied. We need to evacuate you before this situation gets any worse. It's already worse than anyone imagined, Dr. Vasquez said, gesturing toward the main laboratory. The artifact isn't just affecting emotional states, it's creating quantum entanglement between consciousness. Every person within its influence is beginning to form permanent psychic connections with others. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. Permanent? We're talking about the emergence of a collective consciousness that spans species barriers. If the effect continues to expand, it could encompass entire populations. Jake looked at Lyralii, suddenly understanding the true implications of their situation. It wasn't just that they were attracted to each other due to artifact influence, their minds were potentially becoming permanently linked on a quantum level. How do we stop it? Lyralii asked. That's the problem, Dr. Vasquez replied grimly. I'm not sure we can. And, even if we could, I'm not sure we should. She led them toward the main laboratory, where the pillar of energy was now touching the ceiling and spreading outward in complex geometric patterns. The artifact isn't just affecting people randomly. It's selecting optimal psychological matches and creating permanent pair bonds. In the past 3 days, I've observed more genuine compatibility and emotional satisfaction among the affected personnel than most people experience in a lifetime. But, it's also causing the breakdown of normal social structures, Jake pointed out. Is it? Or is it revealing that our normal social structures were already broken? Dr. Vasquez activated her tablet, showing them brain scans and psychological profiles. Look at these readings. The affected individuals show decreased anxiety, improved problem-solving capabilities, and enhanced empathy. They're not losing their individual identities, they're gaining access to expanded emotional and intellectual resources through their paired connections. Jake studied the data, trying to understand what he was seeing. You're saying the artifact is actually helping people? I'm saying it's evolving them. Humanity has always been limited by our individual psychological boundaries. What if we could transcend those limitations while maintaining our essential selves? Lyralii moved closer to the energy pillar, her armor's sensors analyzing the quantum field patterns. Dr. Vasquez, are you certain the effects are beneficial? My people have no natural framework for processing such intense emotional connections. But, they're adapting, Dr. Vasquez replied. Your soldiers outside, I've been monitoring their communications. They're displaying unprecedented levels of cooperation and strategic innovation. They're not losing their military effectiveness, they're enhancing it through emotional intelligence. Jake watched Lyralii study the artifact, and he could see her internal struggle reflected in her posture. She was a trained leader, someone who made decisions based on logic and strategic advantage. But, she was also someone who had just discovered the concept of love, and was being asked to choose between personal happiness and what she understood as her duty. There's something else, Dr. Vasquez continued. The artifact appears to be selecting its pairs based on optimal long-term compatibility, not just immediate attraction. It's essentially creating perfect matches across species barriers. Perfect matches? Jake asked. Psychological, intellectual, and emotional compatibility that could last lifetimes. In human terms, it's finding people their soulmates. Jake felt that universe-shifting sensation again, stronger than ever. Looking at Lyralii, seeing her expression of wonder and uncertainty, he began to understand that whatever was happening between them might be the most real thing he'd ever experienced. But, before any of them could process this revelation further, explosions rocked the facility. The Zephyrian siege forces had apparently decided to end their careful approach and were now conducting a full assault on the laboratory complex. "We need to leave," Jake said, his tactical instincts overriding everything else. "Now." But, as they moved toward the exit, the artifact's energy field pulsed once more, and Jake felt something fundamental shift in his perception of reality. The connection he'd been feeling with Lyralii suddenly became not just emotional but intellectual. He could sense her thoughts, her fears, her desperate hope that they might find a way to preserve what they had discovered together. And, in that moment, he realized that the choice was no longer between duty and personal desires. The artifact had already made the choice for them. Whatever they were becoming together was bigger than either of them individually. The question now was whether they could survive long enough to figure out what that meant. The assault on the research facility had escalated beyond anything Jake had experienced in his military career. Zephyrian plasma cannons carved through reinforced walls like paper, while the facility's defensive systems responded with weapons that definitely hadn't appeared in any geological survey equipment catalogs. Dr. Vasquez led them through maintenance corridors as the building shook around them, her radiation suit sensors beeping urgently as they moved closer to the artifact's energy field. "The quantum entanglement is accelerating," she shouted over the sound of explosions. "Each pulse is creating stronger connections between paired individuals. At this rate, the effect will become irreversible within the hour." Jake felt the truth of her words in the growing clarity of his connection with Lyralii. He could sense her tactical analysis of their situation, her concern for her troops outside, and, underneath it all, a fierce protectiveness toward him that transcended logic or military protocol. It was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. "Is irreversible necessarily bad?" Lyralii asked, echoing Jake's own thoughts so precisely that he wondered if she had actually heard them. "That depends, Dr. Vasquez replied, pausing at a sealed blast door, "on whether you're prepared to fundamentally alter the nature of consciousness for every species in known space." She activated the door controls, and they emerged onto an observation platform overlooking the artifact chamber. What Jake saw there made him question everything he thought he understood about reality. The energy pillar had evolved into something far more complex, a swirling matrix of light and force that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the human eye could process. But it wasn't the artifact itself that captured his attention. It was the people standing around it. Dozens of researchers, technicians, and facility personnel were arranged in precise pairs around the chamber, each couple standing within their own localized energy field. They weren't moving or speaking, but Jake could see their eyes were open and alert. They looked peaceful, almost blissful, as if they had discovered something wonderful. "They're not just paired," Dr. Vasquez explained. "They're networked. Each couple forms a quantum-entangled unit, and all the units are connected through the artifact. They're sharing thoughts, emotions, memories, experiences. They've become something new." "Are they still human?" Jake asked. "They're still themselves, but they're also more than themselves. Imagine having access not just to your own knowledge and skills, but to those of your perfectly matched partner, and, through the network, to the combined experience of everyone connected to the artifact." Lyralii moved to the observation platform's railing, her armor's sensors analyzing the energy patterns below. "My tactical advisors are reporting similar phenomena among our forces. Pairs of soldiers are beginning to function as single strategic units, their effectiveness increasing exponentially." "It's not just effectiveness," Dr. Vasquez said. "They're also reporting unprecedented levels of emotional satisfaction. Depression, anxiety, loneliness, all the psychological ailments that have plagued sentient species for millennia, they're simply disappearing." Jake watched the paired figures below and tried to imagine what they were experiencing. Complete understanding with another being, shared consciousness without loss of individual identity, perfect emotional and intellectual compatibility. It sounded like paradise. It also sounded like the end of individual human experience as anyone had ever known it. "Dr. Vasquez," he said carefully, "what happens to people who aren't compatible with anyone? What happens to individuals who can't or don't want to be paired?" Her expression darkened. "That's unclear. The artifact seems to be highly selective about its pairings, but we don't fully understand the criteria. There have been a few individuals who showed no response to the field at all. And They experienced severe psychological distress. Isolation anxiety that went beyond anything in our psychological literature. One technician actually attempted to physically enter the energy field to force a connection. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the facility's climate control. The artifact isn't just offering enhanced relationships, it's making normal human isolation unbearable. That's one interpretation, Dr. Vasquez admitted. Another interpretation is that it's revealing how isolated and psychologically damaged we were to begin with. Before Jake could respond, alarms began blaring with a new urgency. The facility's central AI announced that containment had been completely breached and emergency evacuation protocols were now in effect. The field is expanding beyond the laboratory, Dr. Vasquez said, checking her readings. In approximately 30 minutes, it will encompass the entire facility. In 6 hours, it will reach the Zephyrian forces outside. In 3 days, if current expansion rates continue, it will affect every inhabited planet in this star system. Jake tried to process the implications. You're talking about the involuntary transformation of millions of people. I'm talking about the potential evolution of consciousness itself. Jake, what if this is how intelligent life is supposed to develop? What if individual consciousness is just an intermediate stage, like developing language or tool use? Lyralii stepped back from the observation platform, her movements reflecting the same internal conflict Jake was feeling through their growing connection. Dr. Vasquez, as a representative of the Zephyrian Empire, I must ask, can this process be reversed? Theoretically, yes. The artifact appears to be powered by quantum resonance feedback from the paired individuals. If we could disrupt that feedback loop, the field would collapse and the connections would dissolve. And the people who are already paired would return to their previous psychological states. All the enhanced capabilities, the emotional satisfaction, the shared consciousness, gone. Jake looked down at the paired figures in the chamber below, seeing their expressions of perfect contentment. Then, he looked at Lyralii, feeling the growing strength of their own connection, the way her thoughts and emotions were becoming as familiar to him as his own. How many people would choose to go back, he asked, if they understood what they were giving up? Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. Based on the preliminary interviews I've conducted, very few. Most of the paired individuals report that they can't imagine returning to their previous state of isolation. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor behind them. Jake's enhanced awareness, partially shared with Lyralii, immediately identified the footfall patterns of multiple individuals moving in tactical formation. Zephyrian soldiers, probably an advanced reconnaissance unit. We have company, Jake announced, drawing his sidearm. Lyralii activated her armor's communication systems. This is Crown Princess Lyralii to all Zephyrian units. Cease advance and maintain perimeter positions. I am conducting negotiations with facility personnel. The response came back immediately, but it wasn't what any of them expected. Instead of acknowledging her orders, multiple voices spoke in perfect unison. Princess Lyralii, you have been affected by hostile alien influence. Please evacuate to minimum safe distance for psychological decontamination. Lyralii's expression shifted to something Jake had never seen from her before, genuine fear. They're not responding as individuals anymore. That level of coordination, that synchronized speech pattern, they've been paired by the artifact's field expansion. Is that bad? Jake asked. For normal Zephyrian military operations, it could be devastating effective. For maintaining individual command authority. She activated her armor's defensive systems. It means I may no longer be recognized as their legitimate commander. The footsteps were getting closer, and Jake could hear the subtle harmonics that indicated powered armor and advanced weaponry. 6 soldiers, moving with the perfect coordination that Lyralii had described. Dr. Vasquez, Jake said urgently, if we wanted to shut down the artifact, how would we do it? The control systems are in the primary laboratory, directly adjacent to the artifact itself. But, Jake, you need to understand, shutting it down would affect everyone currently connected. Including the two of you. Jake felt Lyralii's instant understanding of the implications through their shared consciousness. If they shut down the artifact, they would lose the connection that had become more important to both of them than their individual lives. They would return to being strangers from different species, different worlds, with no basis for any kind of relationship. But, if they didn't shut it down, the artifact would continue expanding until it had transformed every sentient being in reach. Millions of people would lose their individual consciousness, their right to choose their own psychological development. The Zephyrian soldiers rounded the corner, moving in perfect synchronization. Jake could see immediately that these weren't the same individuals who had been maintaining the siege outside. Their armor displayed the energy signatures of artifact influence, and their movements showed the fluid coordination of minds operating in perfect harmony. Princess Lyralii, they said in unison, their voices creating complex harmonics that somehow conveyed both respect and absolute determination. You will accompany us to the decontamination facility for your own protection. I am conducting vital negotiations regarding the artifact, Lyralii replied, her voice carrying the authority of absolute command. You will maintain your positions until further orders. The artifact has compromised your decision-making capacity, the soldiers responded. Zephyrian Command Protocol 7 Alpha is now in effect. Your autonomous authority is temporarily suspended. Jake had never heard of Zephyrian Command Protocol 7 Alpha, but Lyralii's emotional response through their connection told him everything he needed to know. It was the regulation that allowed military subordinates to override royal authority in cases of confirmed psychological compromise. They're going to take me for decontamination, she said quietly. Once I'm separated from the artifact's influence, our connection will fade. And, then? Then, I'll be required to order the complete destruction of this facility and everything in it. Jake felt her certainty about this through their shared awareness. Without the artifact's influence making her capable of love, Lyralii would return to being a Zephyrian military commander whose only concern was preventing a threat to galactic stability. She would sacrifice any number of individual lives to prevent the uncontrolled spread of consciousness-altering technology. Princess Lyralii, the soldiers repeated, please comply with evacuation procedures. Jake stepped between Lyralii and the soldiers, his weapon drawn but not aimed directly at them. She's not going anywhere. The soldiers turned their attention to him, and Jake could see the eerie precision of their coordinated analysis. 6 minds working as one, evaluating threat levels and tactical options. Human mercenary Jake Morrison, they said, somehow knowing his name despite never having encountered him before. You are operating under severe psychological compromise. Please surrender your weapons and accompany Princess Lyralii to the decontamination facility. I don't think so. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her radiation suit sensors beeping frantically. Wait. All of you, look at your readings. The artifact's field is expanding again, and it's accelerating. She was right. Jake could feel it as a physical sensation, like pressure building in the air around them. The quantum field that connected him to Lyralii was strengthening, but it was also reaching out toward Dr. Vasquez and even toward the Zephyrian soldiers. If this continues, Dr. Vasquez said urgently, everyone in this room is going to be permanently connected within minutes. We need to make a decision about the artifact now, before that choice is made for us. Jake felt Lyralii's mind working through the tactical implications, her thoughts as clear to him as his own. The expanding field would eventually connect all of them into a single networked consciousness. The soldiers would lose their ability to follow their decontamination protocols. Dr. Vasquez would become part of the artifact's network instead of its researcher. And Jake would lose his ability to make an objective decision about whether to shut down the artifact. Dr. Vasquez, Lyralii said, if someone shut down the artifact right now, would the existing connections survive? The strongest ones might. Pairs who have been connected for more than 6 hours seem to maintain some level of quantum entanglement even after field exposure ends. Jake felt a spark of hope. He and Lyralii had been connected for several hours now. If they acted quickly, they might be able to preserve their bond while still preventing the uncontrolled expansion that would transform millions of unwilling people. But they would have to reach the artifact's control systems, and that meant going through 6 Zephyrian soldiers who were rapidly approaching perfect tactical coordination. Lyralii, Jake said, knowing she would understand his thoughts before he finished speaking them, are you willing to trust me with this? She looked at him with those impossible starlight eyes, and Jake felt her absolute faith in him flow through their connection. With everything. Jake smiled, raised his weapon, and prepared to fight 6 perfectly coordinated alien soldiers for the right to determine the future of consciousness in the galaxy. Just another Tuesday night for a human mercenary. The battle was about to begin, and Jake had a feeling it would determine whether love could truly conquer all, or whether some conquests came at too high a price. Fighting 6 perfectly coordinated Zephyrian soldiers while maintaining a psychic connection to an alien princess was not something Jake Morrison had ever trained for. The closest military analog would be conducting precision surgery while riding a motorcycle through a minefield, theoretically possible, but not recommended for anyone who planned to live through the experience. The engagement began the moment Jake raised his weapon. The 6 soldiers moved as a single organism, their tactical responses flowing seamlessly from one to another without need for communication. Jake had faced coordinated enemies before, but this was different. These weren't 6 individuals working together, this was one mind operating 6 bodies with perfect efficiency. Fortunately, Jake wasn't fighting alone. Lyralia's combat capabilities, enhanced by her powered armor and years of military training, merged with Jake's tactical instincts through their quantum-entangled consciousness. He found himself anticipating attacks from angles he couldn't see, while she responded to threats with reflexes enhanced by his battlefield experience. They moved together like dancers performing a deadly choreography, each complementing the other's actions with impossible precision. Suppressing fire on the left flank, Jake called out, though Lyralia was already moving to provide exactly that before he finished speaking. Her armor's plasma projectors carved glowing trenches in the corridor walls, forcing 3 of the soldiers to take cover while Jake advanced on the remaining 3. His enhanced awareness, shared with Lyralia, allowed him to track multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining perfect awareness of her position and tactical status. The Zephyrian soldiers adapted quickly to their opponent's unusual coordination, but they were operating under a significant disadvantage. Their perfect tactical harmony was designed for fighting conventional enemies, not opponents who could share consciousness in real time. Every strategy they developed was immediately understood and countered by Jake and Lyralia's combined awareness. "They're trying to flank us," Lyralia observed, though Jake was already moving to counter the maneuver. "I see it. Dr. Vasquez, how much time do we have before the field expansion reaches critical mass?" Dr. Vasquez, taking cover behind a bank of monitoring equipment, checked her readings. "Less than 10 minutes. After that, everyone in the facility will be permanently connected, and the field will start expanding exponentially." Jake felt Lyralia's tactical analysis of their situation through their shared consciousness. The Zephyrian soldiers were gradually gaining ground despite their coordination disadvantage. Their armor was more advanced, their weapons more powerful, and they had training specifically designed for close-quarters combat in confined spaces. But, more importantly, they were fighting to protect what they believed was their princess's life and sanity. Jake could see it in their movements, feel it in the way they pressed their attacks despite taking casualties. These weren't just soldiers following orders, they were loyal protectors willing to die for their commander. "Lyralia," Jake said during a brief lull in the firefight, "your people care about you." "Of course they do. I am their commander and their princess. No, I mean they really care about you. Look at how they're fighting." Through their shared awareness, Jake felt Lyralia's attention focus on her soldiers' tactical patterns. Instead of seeing enemies to be defeated, she began recognizing the individuals beneath the coordinated assault. Soldiers who had served under her command for years, who had followed her into battles across multiple star systems, who were now risking their lives to save her from what they perceived as alien corruption. "They are trying to rescue me," she said quietly. "Just like I'm trying to rescue Dr. Vasquez. Just like you're trying to prevent galactic catastrophe. Everyone thinks they're doing the right thing." Jake felt something shift in Lyralia's emotional state through their connection. The fierce protectiveness she felt toward him remained, but it was now balanced by a growing awareness of her responsibilities toward her own people. "Jake," she said, "what if they are right? What if the artifact is corrupting our judgment?" It was the question Jake had been avoiding since they first met. How could they tell the difference between genuine emotion and artificial enhancement? How could they make rational decisions about the artifact while being influenced by it? "I don't know," Jake admitted, ducking as plasma fire scorched the air above his head. "But I know what I'm feeling for you is more real than anything I've ever experienced. That could be exactly what the artifact wants us to believe. Dr. Vasquez's voice cut through their philosophical discussion with urgent practicality. Jake, Lyrelii, you need to make a decision. The field expansion is accelerating. In 7 minutes, this entire conversation will be moot because all of us will be permanently connected to the artifact's network. Jake looked at the advancing soldiers, then at Lyrelii, then at the monitoring station where Dr. Vasquez was tracking the artifact's expanding influence. Through his enhanced connection with Lyrelii, he could feel her internal struggle between duty and desire, between logic and emotion, between the person she had been and the person she was becoming. "What do you want to do?" he asked her. "I want to trust what we have," she replied. "But I also want to protect millions of people from making a choice they might not understand." "And if shutting down the artifact means losing what we have?" Lyrelii's emotional response came through their connection as clearly as spoken words. She would rather lose their bond than force it on others who hadn't chosen it freely. "Then, we shut it down," Jake said, making the decision for both of them. The Zephyrian soldiers seemed to sense their resolution, pressing their attack with renewed intensity. But Jake and Lyrelii were no longer fighting to maintain their position, they were fighting to reach the primary laboratory where the artifact's control systems waited. "Dr. Vasquez," Lyrelii called out, "can you access the laboratory systems from here?" "Negative. The control interfaces require direct physical access for security reasons." "Then, we go through them." What followed was the most intense 3 minutes of combat Jake had ever experienced. He and Lyrelii moved through the corridor like a single organism, their shared consciousness allowing for tactical coordination that bordered on the supernatural. They anticipated each other's movements, covered each other's advances, and responded to threats with the precision of a well-oiled military unit. But it was their emotional connection that made the difference. The absolute trust they felt for each other, enhanced by the artifact but based on something deeper, allowed them to take risks that would have been impossible for individuals fighting alone. Jake could charge directly into enemy fire because he knew with absolute certainty that Lyrelii would provide covering fire. She could expose herself to enemy attacks because she trusted Jake to neutralize threats before they could harm her. The Zephyrian soldiers, despite their coordination and superior equipment, found themselves gradually overwhelmed by opponents who fought with the seamless integration of shared consciousness combined with the desperate intensity of protecting something they valued more than their own lives. When the last soldier finally fell unconscious rather than dead, Jake noted with relief, the corridor fell silent except for the sound of their breathing and the growing hum of the artifact's energy field. 5 minutes, Dr. Vasquez announced. They reached the primary laboratory to find it transformed into something that belonged more in a science fiction novel than a geological research station. The artifact had grown into a towering spiral of energy that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The paired researchers they had observed earlier were still standing around it, but now they were connected by visible streams of light that flowed between them and through the artifact itself. "It's beautiful," Lyrelii whispered, and Jake had to agree. Whatever the artifact was doing to human and Zephyrian consciousness, the result was visually stunning. The paired individuals looked peaceful and content in a way that transcended mere happiness. They seemed to have achieved a state of perfect harmony with themselves, each other, and the universe around them. "The control interface is there," Dr. Vasquez pointed to a bank of controls built into the artifact's base. "But, Jake, Lyrelii, I need you to understand what you're choosing. If you shut this down, you're not just ending the expansion, you're condemning millions of people to continue living with the psychological limitations and emotional isolation that have plagued sentient species for millennia." Jake looked at the paired individuals, then at Lyrelii, then at his own hands on the control interface. Through their connection, he could feel her thoughts as clearly as his own, and what he felt there was absolute certainty. "The choice has to be freely made," she said. "Consciousness evolution that is forced on people isn't evolution, it's conquest. Even if it would make them happier? Especially then. The right to choose includes the right to choose poorly." Jake began entering the shutdown sequence, his hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was doing. "Dr. Vasquez, what happens to the people who are already connected? The strongest bonds will survive, probably permanently. The weaker ones will fade over the next few hours. And us?" Dr. Vasquez checked her readings one final time. Your connection has been active for approximately 4 hours under high-intensity conditions. My best guess is that you'll retain some level of quantum entanglement indefinitely. Jake felt a wave of relief from Lyralii that matched his own. They might lose the intensity of their current connection, but they wouldn't lose each other completely. Are you ready? He asked her. Together, she replied. They activated the shutdown sequence simultaneously, their hands covering the same controls, their consciousness still perfectly merged in the final moment before the artifact's field collapsed. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The towering spiral of energy contracted like a collapsing star, pulling all the visible connections between paired individuals back into itself before winking out of existence. The laboratory fell silent except for the normal hum of facility equipment and the confused voices of researchers who were suddenly dealing with individual consciousness after hours of shared awareness. Jake felt the intensity of his connection with Lyralii diminish like a tide pulling back from shore. The crystal clarity of her thoughts became whispered impressions. The absolute certainty of her emotions became gentle intuition. But, beneath it all, something remained, a sense of connection that felt permanent and unbreakable. How do you feel? He asked her. Lyralii removed her helmet, her alien features still beautiful but, now somehow more distant. Different. Less connected, but not disconnected. You? Like I've been partially deaf my whole life and just got my hearing back, only to have the volume turned down. Dr. Vasquez approached them, her instruments still taking readings from the now inactive artifact. The field has completely collapsed. The expansion has stopped. And the people who were connected? They're experiencing some disorientation, but no apparent psychological damage. Most of them are asking when they can reactivate the artifact. Jake wasn't surprised. If he had experienced perfect consciousness sharing and, then, had it taken away, he would probably want it back too. What happens now? Lyralii asked. Now we figure out what to do with technology that could fundamentally alter the nature of consciousness for every species in the galaxy, Dr. Vasquez replied. And, we try to prevent every major power from starting wars over who gets to control it. Jake looked around the laboratory, at the deactivated artifact, at the confused researchers, at Lyralii. Any suggestions? Actually, Dr. Vasquez said, I might have one. But, it would require some rather unusual diplomatic arrangements. Jake had a suspicion he wasn't going to like where this was heading. But, then, again, his life had stopped making conventional sense the moment he woke up engaged to an alien princess. I'm listening, he said. And, in the back of his mind, through the faded but persistent connection he still shared with Lyralii, he felt her amusement and affection, and her absolute certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. After all, they were married now. Technically. 6 months after the incident on Kepler 442b, Jake Morrison found himself standing in the most secure conference room in known space, wearing dress clothes that cost more than his old mercenary ship, preparing to address a gathering that included representatives from every major galactic power. The occasion was officially described as the Kepler Accords ratification ceremony, but Jake privately thought of it as the wedding reception that changed the universe. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of diplomatic negotiations, scientific conferences, and media interviews that Jake was still trying to process. The artifact, now safely contained and studied under international supervision, had proven to be just one of many similar devices scattered across the galaxy by a species that had transcended physical existence millions of years ago. Their apparent goal had been to nudge younger civilizations toward the kind of consciousness evolution that they themselves had achieved. The political implications had been staggering. Every major power wanted access to the technology, while simultaneously fearing what their enemies might do with it. Wars had nearly started over custody of the artifact until Dr. Vasquez proposed her unconventional solution. The technology is too dangerous for any one species to control, she had argued before the Galactic Council. But, it's also too valuable to suppress entirely. We need a new kind of governance structure, one that transcends traditional species boundaries. Which was why Jake now found himself about to be sworn in as the co-administrator of the newly established Consciousness Research Institute, alongside his wife, Queen Lyralii of the Zephyrian Empire. The marriage had been a diplomatic necessity that had become a personal joy. Their quantum-entangled bond, weakened by the artifact's shutdown but never entirely severed, had provided the legal framework for the most unusual partnership treaty in galactic history. Two species, traditionally enemies, were now allied through the marriage of their representatives. "Are you nervous?" Lyralii asked, appearing at Jake's side in the conference room. 6 months of marriage hadn't diminished her alien beauty, though she had learned to modulate her armor's glow for formal occasions. Terrified, Jake admitted. "I'm about to become responsible for regulating technology that could transform the entire galaxy. A year ago, my biggest responsibility was remembering to file flight plans." "You will do well," Lyralii assured him, and Jake felt the quiet confidence she projected through their residual connection. "We will do well together." Their partnership had been the key to making the Consciousness Research Institute work. Jake brought the human perspective on individual freedom and personal choice, while Lyralii contributed Zephyrian expertise in large-scale social coordination. Together, they had developed protocols for safely studying consciousness enhancement technology while preventing its weaponization or forced implementation. Dr. Vasquez, now the Institute's chief scientist, approached them with her final briefing materials. "The first volunteer test groups are ready to begin controlled exposure trials next month. We have participants from 12 different species, all fully informed and freely consenting." "And security protocols?" Lyralii asked. "Triple redundancy on all containment systems, with shutdown controls accessible to representatives from every major galactic power. If anything goes wrong, we can collapse the fields immediately." Jake nodded, though he still felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. "What about the other artifacts? Any progress on locating them?" 7 confirmed sites across 4 different galactic sectors, Dr. Vasquez replied. "All of them are now under international supervision using our protocols. The artifacts appear to be dormant until activated by conscious intent, so they're stable as long as no one tries to use them." The conference room began filling with delegates as the ceremony approached. Jake recognized representatives from the Human Colonial Alliance, the Zephyrian Empire, the Hegemony of Worlds, and dozens of smaller political entities. 6 months ago, most of these people would have been plotting wars against each other. Now they were cooperating on the most important scientific project in galactic history. "Do you think we made the right choice?" Jake asked Lyralii quietly. "Shutting down the artifact on Kepler 442b? "I think we made the only choice we could live with," she replied. "Forced evolution is not evolution, it is domination." "But voluntary evolution, chosen freely by informed individuals, that is something entirely different." Jake felt the truth of her words through their connection, and the rightness of their decision. The artifact could have transformed millions of people without their consent, creating a galaxy full of perfectly matched, psychically connected individuals. But it also would have eliminated the diversity of consciousness that made each species unique. Instead, they had chosen a more difficult path, making the technology available to those who wanted it, while protecting the rights of those who preferred to remain unchanged. It was messier, more complicated, and infinitely more respectful of individual autonomy. The ceremony itself was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. Representatives from dozens of species came forward to formally recognize the Consciousness Research Institute and its governing protocols. Jake and Lyralii took their oaths of office in a dozen different languages, promising to use their authority only in service of freely chosen consciousness evolution. But the most meaningful moment came at the end, when the Galactic Council formally recognized their marriage as a legitimate political alliance between species. Jake had been married before, briefly, when he was younger and more optimistic about conventional relationships. That marriage had been a human ceremony in a human church, focused on human traditions and human expectations. This ceremony was something entirely different. Representatives from multiple species offered blessings based on their own cultural traditions, creating a celebration that transcended any single world's customs. Zephyrian harmonic ceremonies blended with human exchange of vows, while alien dignitaries contributed ritual elements that Jake couldn't even pronounce. Through it all, Jake felt his connection with Lyralii strengthening not through artificial enhancement, but through shared purpose and mutual respect. Their quantum entanglement might have brought them together, but what kept them together was their choice to build something meaningful from an impossible situation. When the formal ceremonies concluded, Jake found himself standing with Lyralii on the observation deck of the space station that housed their new headquarters. Through the transparent aluminum walls, they could see ships from a dozen different species maintaining peaceful formation around the station.
Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't taken that extraction job? Jake asked.
Frequently, Lyralii replied.
The galaxy would probably be embroiled in wars over artifact control by now.
Millions of people would have been forcibly evolved without their consent.
The Zephyrian Empire would still view humans as inferior beings suitable only for exploitation. And, personally?
Lyralii turned to look at him, her starlight eyes reflecting the cosmic panorama beyond the observation deck. Personally, I would never have learned that the universe contains possibilities for connection that transcend species, culture, and individual limitation. I would never have discovered that love is not a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be celebrated. Jake felt her emotions through their bond, not the overwhelming intensity they had experienced under the artifact's influence, but something deeper and more sustainable. Love enhanced by understanding, attraction deepened by respect, passion balanced by shared purpose.
Any regrets? He asked.
Only one, Lyralii said. I regret that it took an alien artifact to show us what we were capable of becoming together. Jake pulled her closer, marveling at how natural the gesture had become despite their species' differences.
Maybe that's the point. Maybe consciousness evolution isn't about technology or artifacts or forced transformation. Maybe it's about choosing to be more than we thought possible. Together? Always together.
They stood in comfortable silence, watching the ships of their new alliance patrol the space around their headquarters. In the distance, Jake could see the research vessels that would soon begin the careful, controlled exploration of consciousness enhancement technology. Volunteers from across the galaxy would come here to explore new possibilities for mental and emotional connection, but always by choice, always with full understanding of the risks and benefits. Dr. Vasquez joined them on the observation deck, carrying a datapad filled with reports from their research teams.
The preliminary studies are showing remarkable promise. Controlled exposure to low-level quantum entanglement fields seems to enhance empathy and emotional intelligence without compromising individual identity. Any volunteers showing regret about participation? Lyralii asked. None so far.
In fact, we have a waiting list that extends for years.
Apparently, the prospect of enhanced consciousness is quite appealing when offered as a free choice rather than forced transformation. Jake wasn't surprised.
Humans had always been curious about expanding their capabilities, and the other species weren't much different. The difference was that now they could explore those possibilities safely, with full informed consent and proper safeguards.
There is one other development you should know about, Dr. Vasquez continued. The artifact sites we've discovered aren't randomly distributed. They form a pattern, a kind of navigational network pointing towards something in the galactic core. Something? Jake asked. We think it might be the homeworld of the species that created the artifacts. Or what's left of it. Lyralii's tactical instincts, shared through their connection, immediately began analyzing the implications. A species that transcended physical existence would not leave randomly scattered artifacts. There is purpose behind their placement.
Our working theory, Dr. Vasquez said, is that the artifacts are stages in a larger process. Each one is designed to help younger species develop the consciousness capabilities necessary for the next stage.
And the final stage? We don't know yet.
But, Jake, Lyralii, if our analysis is correct, the artifacts we've found are just the beginning. There may be dozens more scattered across the galaxy, each one designed to guide consciousness evolution toward some ultimate goal.
Jake felt a familiar mix of excitement and apprehension. Just when he thought their lives were settling into something resembling normalcy, the universe had presented them with a new mystery that could reshape everything they thought they knew about intelligent life. How long before we're ready to mount an expedition to the galactic core? He asked.
At least 5 years, Dr. Vasquez replied. We need to fully understand the artifacts we have before we start looking for more. And, we need to develop the kind of consciousness capabilities that might be required for contact with a transcended species.
5 years, Jake mused.
That gives us time to build the institute, perfect our protocols, and maybe figure out what we're really dealing with.
It also gives us time to see what kind of consciousness evolution our volunteers achieve, Lyrelii added.
If the artifacts are preparing us for eventual contact with their creators, we need to understand what that preparation is supposed to accomplish.
Dr. Vasquez left them with her reports, returning to the laboratories where teams of scientists were carefully studying the quantum mechanics of consciousness enhancement.
Jake and Lyrelii remained on the observation deck, watching the ships of their alliance patrol the space around their new home.
5 years, Jake said thoughtfully. Think we'll still be married when this is all over?
Lyrelii's laughter was musical, carrying harmonics that no human throat could produce but that Jake had learned to find beautiful. Jake Morrison, you are bonded to me by quantum entanglement, political alliance, and freely chosen love. Even if the universe ended tomorrow, I would find a way to remain connected to you in whatever comes after. That's either the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me, or the most terrifying.
It can be both.
Jake looked out at the stars, thinking about the journey that had brought him from a simple extraction job to co-administrator of the most important scientific project in galactic history. A year ago, he had been a mercenary with no connections, no responsibilities, and no prospects beyond the next paying job. Now he was married to an alien queen, responsible for regulating consciousness enhancement technology, and apparently preparing to make contact with transcended beings who had been guiding galactic evolution for millions of years. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it was definitely the life he wanted.
Ready for whatever comes next? Lyrelii asked, as if reading his thoughts through their connection.
Jake took her hand in his, feeling the familiar spark of their quantum bond, the warmth of her alien skin, and the absolute certainty that whatever challenges the universe threw at them, they would face them together.
Always, he said. Let's go change the galaxy.
And, as their ships patrolled the space around their new headquarters, as their scientists worked to unlock the secrets of consciousness itself, and as volunteers from across known space prepared to explore new possibilities for connection and understanding, Jake Morrison and Queen Lyrelii began the next phase of their impossible journey together. The universe, as it turned out, was much stranger and more wonderful than either of them had ever imagined. And they had the rest of their lives to explore it. Together.